Welcome back, learner, to another deep dive. And usually when we talk about making a good, solid life decision, the default expectation is, well, it's a spreadsheet.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You want the color-coded columns.
Right. You want pros, cons, risk factors.
Yeah, the 10-year projections.
Exactly. We treat that level of, intense calculation as the absolute gold standard for navigating the modern world.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels responsible.
It does. It feels like you're doing the right thing.
But today, we're exploring a philosophy that looks at your beautifully color-coded spreadsheet and sees, well, a stressful, self-imposed cage.
A cage. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
We are analyzing a fascinating 2013 text by a thinker named Su Feng, translated and edited by Qingyu. It's titled The Distinction Between Rational Thinking and Spiritual Thinking.
Right.
And the mission for you listening today is to really examine the mechanics of how you make decisions. Because while society puts rationality on this massive pedestal, this source actually argues that being rational is only the second highest way to live.
Yeah, which is kind of a wild concept for us today. The text actually categorizes human operation into this strict 5-tier hierarchy to illustrate this point.
Okay, lay those out for us.
So it states that ignorant people rely on instinct.
Okay.
Worldly people rely on personal gain. Mortals rely on emotions. Wise people rely on rationality. And then at the very top, celestial beings rely on spirituality.
Wait, so the rational thinkers are considered wise?
Yes, exactly. To understand the ultimate goal, which is spiritual thinking, we really have to look closely at that step right below it. The rational thinkers.
Right, the wise ones.
Yeah, and it notably doesn't insult them. It acknowledges that rationality is a highly functional state. It defines these individuals as people who thoroughly deliberate on everything.
They're doing the homework.
They're doing the homework. They navigate using the rules and regulations of the real world. They analyze personal gains and losses. They summarize their experiences, weigh the pros and cons.
Basically the spreadsheet people.
The spreadsheet people, exactly. They constantly take preventive measures to avoid disaster.
You know, they sound like corporate risk management officers.
Right.
Like, a rational thinker is someone playing defensive chess with life. They sit there mapping out every possible catastrophe, every single countermove, before they advance a single pawn.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the text even provides the sort of internal mottos of this tier.
Oh, what are they?
Things like, beware of others, or think thrice before acting.
Think thrice, not twice, thrice.
Right. And be cautious of being deceived and ask a few more questions.
I mean, those mottos really reveal the underlying mechanism of that whole rational mindset. It is entirely defensive.
Completely. The rational thinker basically operates on the assumption that the world is just a series of threats that need to be mitigated.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if someone tells you they're going to think thrice and ask a few more questions before signing a contract, you consider them smart, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You tire them.
Exactly. But Su Feng's text frames this cautious, meticulous approach as a severe limitation.
Interesting. Why?
Well, the issue isn't that defensive chess doesn't work. The issue is that carrying the weight of the future on your shoulders at all times is just fundamentally exhausting.
Because you're constantly projecting into an unknown future.
Right. You're trying to wrestle it into a predictable shape using literally nothing but your own intellect.
And if playing defensive chess against life is that exhausting, what does the source suggest we do instead? Do we just throw the board away?
Pretty much. And this is where the text pivots to the highest tier, the spiritual thinker.
The celestial being.
Exactly. And the contrast in how they make decisions is jarring. The text states that spiritual thinkers act spontaneously according to their nature.
Spontaneously.
Yeah, they respond to destiny without overthinking. So instead of relying on all that accumulated data and those future projections, they prioritize their initial feelings.
Wait, their initial feelings.
Yeah, their sensory stimuli. They use that to make prompt decisions.
So the shift is from a locus of intense internal calculation to one of pure external responsiveness.
Exactly. And the text goes on to specify that these celestial beings, they do not worry about consequences or success or personal gain or loss.
Okay, that sounds nice, but...
And more provocatively, it claims they do not even worry about future necessities like food or clothing.
Whoa. Okay. I have to challenge that on behalf of anyone listening who actually has to pay rent this month.
Fair enough.
Not worrying about food or clothing, making decisions without considering the consequences. I mean, in the real world, that sounds like a fast track to ruin.
It does sound like that, yeah.
If I just follow my initial sensory stimuli, I might, quit my job on a Tuesday, buy a sports car I can't afford, and end up sleeping on a park bench.
Right. Right.
The text says they behave just like a baby. But a baby only survives because an adult is doing the rational calculation of keeping it alive.
That is, I mean, the resistance you are describing right now is the exact friction the text anticipates from the rational tier.
Guilty as charged.
But if we look at the philosophical foundation of the source, it is not advocating for reckless, impulsive hedonism. The distinction really lies in what drives the action.
Okay, explain that.
So, a rational thinker is driven by anxious calculation to control an outcome, right?
Yeah.
But the spiritual thinker is driven by their soul. They operate with absolute trust in what the text calls the operation of the Tao, cause and effect, and the greatest creator.
So it's a completely different foundation of trust.
Exactly. When the text says they behave like a baby, it means they act without a hidden agenda, no secondary motives.
Oh, I see.
A baby cries not as some calculated manipulation to secure resources, It cries as a pure, unfiltered expression of the present moment.
Right. The imagery the source uses is actually really grounded in natural rhythms. It talks about laying eggs when it's time to lay eggs, crowing when it's time to crow.
Yes, living when it's time to live, and dying when it's time to die.
So the spiritual thinker isn't ignoring reality at all. They are just responding exclusively to what is directly in front of them, rather than a hallucinated future.
Beautifully put.
Like laying an egg when it's time to lay an egg. For the rational thinker, laying an egg involves a market analysis of current egg prices.
Right, a risk assessment of local foxes.
Exactly. A 10-year structural plan for the coop. But the spiritual thinker just lays the egg because the biological and environmental conditions in that present moment dictate that an egg must be laid.
That's exactly it. And that brings us to the core argument of why the source views the rational approach as not just exhausting, but actually fundamentally flawed.
Flawed. How so?
Well, the text directly challenges the premise that human calculation can actually secure the future.
Okay.
It posits that all our schemes, all our defensive strategies, they cannot alter the workings of the Tao.
Because there's too much we don't know.
Exactly. To explain why, the source introduces the concept of the 64 factors.
The 64 factors.
Yeah. It states that everything operates within the Tao, which is constructed from astronomical combinations of these 64 factors.
Astronomical combinations.
Right. And then it asks this really humbling question, how could a human ever possibly understand or calculate them all?
Let's break down the mechanics of that, because I think it exposes the blind spot of the rational thinker perfectly.
Yeah, let's do it.
If we assume these 64 factors represent every conceivable variable in the universe, time, location, physics, the unseen motives of 8 billion other people, microscopic weather changes.
The combinations are literally infinite.
Right. It actually reminds me of a software developer trying to fix a bug in a massive legacy code base.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Like the developer rationally calculates that changing this one specific line of code will perfectly fix the login page, but they can't see the millions of unseen dependencies.
The other 63 factors.
Exactly. So they implement their perfectly calculated fix, and suddenly the entire server crashes. The rational mind assumes a linear cause and effect. A leads to B. But the text is saying the universe operates as this multidimensional web.
Yeah, the developer in your analogy is working with just a fraction of the data while fully believing they possess the whole picture.
Right.
And the text underscores the hubris of this with the phrase, when humans make plans, God laughs.
Classic.
Right. Or even more pointedly, it says, the fox knew too much, that's how he lost his tail.
Oh, wow. The fox knew too much, that's how he lost his tail. The mechanism of that quote is brilliant.
It really is.
Because a purely instinctual animal would just avoid the trap entirely or grab the bait and run. But the hyper-rational fox sits there overanalyzing the mechanism of the snare.
Calculate the tensile strength of the wire.
Right. The precise angle of approach. And in all that intellectual overreach, he completely misses the basic reality of his tail drifting into the danger zone.
Exactly. The text highlights the profound irony of this overreach. It actually states, a cunning person tries to avoid misfortune, yet heaven seizes his soul at the very moment he schemes.
At the very moment, wow.
Right. In contrast, the true gentleman does not seek blessings, yet heaven fulfills his intentions.
So the harder you try, the worse it gets.
Exactly. The harder the rational thinker tries to control outcomes and wriggle out of what it calls the net of heaven and earth, the more they entangle themselves in cause and effect.
Which the text refers to as cleverness may overreach itself.
Right. You build this fortress of rational calculations to keep out disaster. But because you cannot account for the astronomical combinations of the 64 factors.
Your fortress inevitably becomes the cage that traps you.
Exactly.
So the rational thinker views their intellect as a shield, but the source argues it's really just an illusion of control. The math simply doesn't support the idea that we can predict the future.
It really doesn't.
Which leads to the practical application of all this. If rationality is mathematically futile against the 64 factors, how does the source instruct us to actually live as spiritual thinkers? Like, how do we navigate the world without our spreadsheets?
Well, the text calls for a radical embrace of uncertainty.
Radical uncertainty.
By adopting the mindset of what we might call the muddled sage.
The muddled sage.
Yeah, he quotes, "The way of the sage is to abandon wisdom and cunning. Without abandoning wisdom and cunning, it is difficult to maintain constancy."
Wait, abandoning wisdom is a heavy directive, especially when the text just established earlier that rationality is the domain of the wise.
It is heavy, but it requires recognizing the paradox of clarity. The source provides this incredible perspective. It says, "The ordinary person is clear and bright, while I alone am dull. The ordinary person is perceptive, while I alone am muddled."
Okay, so the ordinary rational person believes they have perfect clarity.
Right. They look at a situation and neatly categorize it as a definitive win or a definitive loss.
But the spiritual thinker, the sage, appears muddled because they refuse to make those definitive categorizations.
Exactly. They refuse to categorize because they understand the interdependence of outcomes.
Right. The text explicitly points out that misfortune, that is where happiness depends. Happiness, that is where misfortune underlies.
Yes. And that mechanism of interdependence completely destroys the foundation of rational calculation.
How so?
Because when you think you are making the perfectly optimal rational choice, that very choice might be the catalyst for an unforeseen failure hidden within the 64 factors.
Oh, man.
And conversely, when you experience a terrible setback that your rational mind tried desperately to avoid, it might actually be the exact necessary ingredient for your greatest growth.
The text asks, who can know the mysteries?
Exactly. Who can know? Once you truly accept that you cannot know the ultimate outcome of any action, the desperate need to perfectly calculate it dissolves.
You are free to be muddled.
You are free to be muddled.
It completely reframes how we view decision-making. I mean, instead of viewing a decision as a test where you must select the absolute correct answer to avoid punishment, you view it as simply the next step in a continuous flow.
Yes, a flow. The text contrasts the two mindsets beautifully here. The rational thinker is trapped in thinking things through and being cautious and meticulous.
It's offensive.
Right. But the spiritual thinker thrives by being adaptable and carefree, allowing oneself to flow with the Tao.
And being adaptable and carefree requires yielding. It's really the difference between frantically paddling a canoe upstream against the raging current of those 64 factors and simply turning the canoe around.
Letting the current take you?
Yeah. You stop fighting the current of the Tao, you trust the water, and you use your energy solely to steer around the rocks as they immediately appear in front of you.
Right, which requires immense faith in the process of life itself. A belief that paying attention to your initial authentic responses to the present moment is entirely sufficient.
It is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, we started today looking at the heavily fortified, anxious world of the rational thinker, the Tier 4 wise person who just exhausts themselves playing offensive chess against an unpredictable universe.
An exhausting way to live.
Truly. And through Zhu Feng's text, we explored the leap to Tier 5, the spontaneous, trusting existence of the spiritual thinker.
The celestial being.
Yeah, the celestial being who acts like a baby, who crows when it's time to crow, and who understands that trying to outsmart the 64 factors is literally impossible. True wisdom, it turns out, might look a little bit muddled to the rest of the world.
It really might. Moving from a life of anxious prevention to a life of present participation is profound.
So profound.
You know, the text leaves us with the principle that a celestial spiritual thinker acts on their initial feelings and sensory stimuli without second guessing.
No second guessing.
Right. So for everyone listening, consider the last major agonizing decision you had to make.
Oh, we've all had one recently.
The one that consumed your thoughts. The one where you drafted the spreadsheets, the risk assessments, the pros and cons lists.
The late nights worrying.
Exactly. If you had entirely stripped away all of those exhausting, rational calculations, what was your very first uncalculated instinct?
Wow.
And how different might your life look right now if you had simply trusted it?